The voice came sharp and trembling with authority that wasn't earned. "Sir, step away from the water right now, or I'm calling the police for trespassing." She stood between me and the lake like a sentry guarding stolen treasure. The president of the Serenity Shores Homeowners Association. Perfectly styled silver hair. Expensive perfume clashing violently with the clean scent of pine and cold mountain air. Her manicured hand hovered near her phone, ready to summon enforcement as if law itself belonged to her. I looked past her, past the illegal steel gate she stood in front of, past the spotless white BMW idling behind her, vanity plates gleaming, and out toward the water. Lake Serenity. 3,100 acres of mountain wilderness surrounding a mirror-smooth lake that had belonged to my family longer than her bloodline had been in this country. "You're threatening to arrest me," I said calmly, "for accessing water I own. Every drop." Her smile was tight. Disbelieving. Dismissive. I reached into my truck and pulled out a weathered leather sleeve, the kind passed down carefully, reverently. Inside was the original 1923 deed, yellowed, fragile, sacred, signed by President Calvin Coolidge himself. Federal land patent. Mineral rights. And most importantly, exclusive water rights to every surface drop within the boundaries. Behind her gate were hundreds of multimillion-dollar homes, each with manicured lawns and private docks extending into water none of them legally owned. They had assumed it was theirs. They had built their lives on that assumption. She waved her HOA badge like it outweighed a century of federal law. She had no idea that one quiet title lawsuit could strip every one of those homes of lake access forever. They believed my family was gone. They were wrong. My name is Ezra Callahan. I am a third-generation land surveyor who thought he was inheriting peace and solitude. Instead, I inherited a war. My great-grandfather, Thomas Callahan, bought this land in 1923 during the mining boom. Back then, the lake had no name. Just water, granite, mist, and silence. He didn't buy views. He bought rights. Absolute rights. Surface, mineral, and water, secured under federal authority when paperwork still meant something permanent. A century later, the lake looked unchanged. Morning mist still rose like breath off cold glass. Loon still called across the valley at dawn, echoing like cathedral bells. Pine needles carpeted the forest floor, and the air was so clean it burned your lungs. After my divorce, this place felt like salvation. 20 years of marriage had collapsed into paperwork and bitterness. I lost my house. Half my surveying business. Most of my confidence. What remained was exhaustion and a desperate need for quiet. This inheritance wasn't about wealth, it was about survival. What I didn't expect was Cordelia Ashworth. In the 1980s, while my family had moved on, a developer named Magnus Properties began building luxury cabins around the lake's perimeter. They were beautiful. Expensive. Irresistible. By the 1990s, Serenity Shores HOA was born. 127 homes, monthly dues, tight rules. 30 years later, that HOA had ballooned into 847 homeowners, each paying into a gated enclave where the average home value exceeded $1.2 million. This wasn't a lakeside community anymore. It was a fortress of affluence. Cordelia Ashworth ruled it. 59 years old. Former corporate HR director. HOA president for 8 consecutive years. She carried an iPad like a weapon and enforced a 47-page community standards manual that dictated everything from mailbox colors to dog breeds. She had come from Connecticut and brought control with her. The first warning sign should have been the gate. When I arrived that morning expecting my great-grandfather's old dirt access road, I found a keypad-controlled steel barrier, cameras, and a guard shack that definitely hadn't existed in 1923. Private property, the teenage guard said apologetically. HOA members only. That's when Cordelia appeared, heels clicking on fresh asphalt, eyes scanning me like a threat assessment. Flannel shirt. Muddy boots. Beat-up Ford truck. Perhaps, she said sweetly, you'd be more comfortable at the public access point 30 miles south. We've had issues with undesirable elements. Undesirable. I showed her the deed. She glanced at it like it was a grocery receipt. That old document doesn't supersede our community standards, she said. This is a private, gated community. The guard reached for his radio. I was leaving peacefully when something caught my eye. Down by the shoreline, heavy equipment, concrete forms, crews constructing what looked like a new boat launch, digging directly into my lake. That was their first mistake. 3 days later, the letter arrived. Cease and desist. Unauthorized lake access. 23 pages of legal intimidation from a high-priced firm claiming the HOA had gained adverse possession rights through decades of use. Adverse possession. Steal something long enough, and the law might let you keep it. They threatened $5,000 daily fines. Attached homeowner testimonies. Claimed uninterrupted access since the 1980s. They didn't account for one thing. I'm a surveyor. And surveyors know where truth is buried. In the courthouse basement, under buzzing fluorescent lights and decades of dust, I found the original land patent. Unambiguous. Absolute. Water rights never transferred. Never sold. Never abandoned. The HOA's incorporation documents didn't mention water rights even once. They had been charging lake access fees, tens of millions of dollars, for something they never owned. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. And they had been documenting it for me for nearly 4 decades. They thought one letter would scare me off. Instead, they had just declared war. The courthouse basement smelled like mildew, dust, and forgotten promises. File cabinets groaned as if annoyed at being disturbed after decades of silence. But down there, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, history doesn't lie, it waits. What I found wasn't just confirmation of ownership. It was a map of deception. The 1923 land patent was explicit. Federal authority. Surface water rights granted in full, with boundaries described in survey language so precise it could only have come from an era when mistakes were permanent. From my surveying days, I knew this truth better than most. Land and water are separate beasts. You can own the shoreline and still trespass every time your boat touches the water. Magnus Properties had never owned the water. They couldn't sell what they didn't have. And because they never owned it, they never transferred it to Serenity Shores HOA. Every homeowner deed contained the same quiet clause, subject to existing easements and water rights. A legal asterisk large enough to swallow an empire. Martha, the county clerk, found the situation hysterical. She'd seen it before, HOAs mistaking gates for sovereignty. Third water rights mess this year, she chuckled, handing me stacks of documents thick enough to break a wrist. They always think fences mean ownership. Back at the lake, I began documenting everything. Every no trespassing sign, GPS marked, photographed. The illegal boat launch, captured from multiple angles. No permits. No environmental clearance. They were excavating my lake bottom like it was their personal swimming pool. Then came the numbers. Serenity Shores had charged its members $2,400 a year for lake access. Multiply that by 847 homeowners. Multiply that again by 37 years. $75 million. $75 million collected for access to property they never controlled. This wasn't entitlement anymore. This was systemic fraud. I filed formal complaints with the County Water Board, requesting an immediate stop to all lake construction. I copied the editor of Mountain Valley News, because government agencies move faster when journalists start asking questions. Cordelia responded within 24 hours. Emergency HOA meeting. Closed session. Security concerns regarding an outside agitator. A sympathetic homeowner leaked the agenda. Cordelia had shifted from dismissive to paranoid. She started asking neighbors about me, my intentions, my finances, my real motives. She hired Sentinel Solutions, a private community security firm better described as intimidation with a logo. Their newest guard was Jake. 19. College sophomore. Polite. Uncomfortable. This job just pays for textbooks, he whispered one morning as I photographed shoreline damage. Ms. Ashworth called 4 times yesterday asking if you'd shown up. She seems stressed. Cordelia distributed flyers. Protect our property values from legal predators. 12 homeowners signed her petition. Most didn't understand what they were supporting. The crews kept working. Diesel fumes poisoned the mountain air. Shoreline that had been untouched for a century was carved up in days. They were building my case for me. Patience is a skill passed down through generations of surveyors. The land always tells the truth, if you listen long enough. Cordelia's next move came in the form of spectacle. Hand-delivered invitations announced an emergency community safety meeting. The flyer featured a telephoto photo of me at the lake. Captioned, "Protect our community from outside legal predators." Saturday morning, someone knocked on my cabin door. Griffin Mulhouse stood there holding a manila folder and wearing the expression of a man who knew he'd been lied to. Retired contracts attorney. 71. Sharp eyes dulled only by regret. "I owe you an apology," he said, settling into a porch chair as pine sap warmed in the sun. "I questioned these water rights when I bought my place. My realtor told me not to worry. Said it had all been resolved decades ago." He showed me his deed. Same clause. Same loophole. "I spent 37 years practicing law," he said quietly. "And I let a kid in a polo shirt give me advice." What Griffin explained next made the morning air taste like victory. Under Western water law, prior appropriation rules all. First in time, first in right. My great-grandfather's 1923 claim didn't just precede the HOA, it obliterated it. And adverse possession. It requires hostile use of property you could legally touch in the first place. They hadn't been establishing ownership. They had been trespassing for 37 years. Griffin offered to help. Pro bono. Part guilt. Part fascination. What followed was what he called aggressive passive resistance. Every morning at 6 a.m., I visited the lake. Folding chair. Coffee thermos. Fishing gear. Survey equipment. I documented everything. Time, location, interaction. The crunch of my truck on gravel became Cordelia's alarm clock. She started showing up to glare at me through designer sunglasses, hiking gear still bearing price tags. "This harassment has to stop," she snapped one morning. "I'm sitting quietly on my property," I replied. "How exactly am I harassing anyone?" She called the sheriff. Deputy Martinez arrived, reviewed my documents, and delivered a sentence Cordelia hadn't expected. This gentleman has every legal right to be here. You may want to consult legal counsel." That was when the fractures began. A Facebook group appeared overnight. Serenity Shore's Truth. Leaked meeting minutes. Resignations. 3 board members quietly stepped down rather than risk liability. Cordelia doubled down. Construction intensified. And then, she crossed a line. One morning, I arrived to find bulldozers dumping gravel across my traditional lake access point. Decorative boulders placed with surgical precision to block entry. "Emergency shoreline stabilization," the foreman muttered. My surveyor instinct screamed. They had bulldozed through protected wetlands where 3 mountain streams fed the lake. I called State Fish and Wildlife from my truck. Inspector Janet Kowalski arrived 90 minutes later. Her face went pale as she surveyed the damage. $50,000 violation minimum, she said. $5,000 per day until restoration. And this is being referred to the Army Corps of Engineers. Corporate shields vanish when environmental laws are broken. Personal liability begins. Cordelia didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath her was starting to give way. The smell of crushed cattails lingered for days after the bulldozers left, sweet and rotten at the same time. Once you've worked land long enough, you learn that destruction has a scent. It doesn't disappear quickly. It settles into memory. Cordelia Ashworth had crossed into territory where money and confidence no longer protected her. Environmental law doesn't care about gated communities, prestige, or vanity plates. It only cares about damage and intent. Inspector Kowalski's report spread through Serenity Shores faster than panic ever could. Environmental fines were stacking daily. 6 figures. Climbing. The HOA's insurance carrier began distancing itself immediately. Willful destruction of protected wetlands has a way of making underwriters vanish. And then something happened Cordelia never anticipated. The community started whispering. Tobias Creek found me that afternoon, leaning against his beat-up pontoon boat like a man who'd been waiting a long time to speak. A fishing guide with hands shaped by 25 years of nets, ropes, and weather. Never saw any paper saying they owned this water, he said plainly. Always wondered what gave them the right to fence off God's creation. From Tobias's boat, the damage looked even worse. Gravel plumes clouded previously crystal-clear shallows. Spawning grounds erased in hours. Ecosystems Mother Nature had built over decades destroyed by people with clipboards and confidence. Took 50 years to make this, Tobias muttered. They wrecked it in 3. 3 homeowners came next. Quiet visits. Nervous glances over shoulders. They were terrified, not of me, but of what their HOA had done in their name. One leaked a detail that shifted the balance even further. Emergency board meetings. Almost nightly. Panic about special assessments exceeding $1,000 per household. Legal fees already past $60,000 and climbing. Property listings quietly appearing online as families tried to escape before the collapse became public. Cordelia's response was predictable. She went to the news. Channel 7 arrived on a Thursday morning. Camera crew. Smiles. Cordelia posed lakeside, framed by water she claimed was under siege by outside agitators. That afternoon, Inspector Kowalski returned unannounced. The collision was spectacular. As Cordelia spoke into the microphone about community safety and environmental stewardship, the inspector stepped into frame and began serving federal violation notices. Cordelia's composure cracked on live television. "This is persecution," she shouted. "We're protecting property values from predators and terrorists." The clip went viral before sunset. HOA president melts down during federal investigation. The comments were unforgiving. Attendance at HOA meetings exploded, from 24 loyalists to nearly 90 furious homeowners demanding answers. Motions of no confidence appeared. Board members resigned rather than risk personal liability. Cordelia spent mornings sitting in her BMW staring at the lake like it had betrayed her. She was running out of options. That's when Griffin called. "Courthouse. Now." In the archives basement, under the same buzzing lights that had started all this, Griffin laid out financial records like a battlefield map. Lake access fees. 37 years. Monthly payments. Each one a separate count. $75 million. Griffin said quietly. And no statute of limitations for ongoing fraud. I felt the weight of it settle into my chest. I could bankrupt them. Every dock. Every home. Every family. But looking at those numbers, something unexpected surfaced. Responsibility. Not everyone here had been a thief. Many had been victims, retirees, families, people who trusted paperwork they didn't understand and leaders who assured them everything was legitimate. "What's your move?" Griffin asked. "I want Cordelia to expose herself," I said. "Publicly. Justice with witnesses." The plan was precise. Surgical. Griffin filed complaints with every agency that mattered: consumer fraud, environmental protection, water boards, the IRS. Agencies don't like being second to uncover wrongdoing. They compete. Investigations multiplied. Meanwhile, Cordelia unraveled. She authorized more construction. More harassment. More mistakes. One morning, she ordered crews to block my usual lake access with generators and floodlights. Psychological warfare disguised as maintenance. The foreman, Mike Peterson, looked sick explaining it. "She offered cash bonuses," he whispered later. "Off the books. Told us to use whatever noise was necessary to discourage you." He showed me the texts. Orders to obstruct. To intimidate. To make me understand I wasn't welcome. Mike started documenting everything, for his own protection. Cordelia even suggested positioning equipment so my truck couldn't leave. That crossed from intimidation into criminal conspiracy. State inspectors returned. Fines jumped again. 12 homeowners listed their houses. Property values dropped 8% in 3 weeks. Then Cordelia made the mistake that destroyed her completely. Fake social media accounts. Posts accusing me of being unstable. Dangerous. A predator. Dozens of them. Unhinged. Sloppy. The reporter traced every account back to one IP address. Cordelia's. The headline detonated what little support she had left. HOA president caught running fake accounts to defame property owner. Emergency petitions circulated. Quorum collapsed. Homeowners threatened to withhold dues. Bankruptcy loomed. 3 days before the annual meeting, Cordelia physically blocked the community center doors, screaming about terrorists until a sheriff's deputy gently moved her aside, on camera. By the time October 14th arrived, Serenity Shores was no longer a gated paradise. It was a reckoning. And everyone knew it. The Serenity Shores Community Center had never held that many people. Folding chairs spilled into hallways. Media cameras lined the walls. Sheriff's deputies stood near the exits, not for show, but because everyone knew emotions were about to break containment. 347 homeowners filled the room. Reporters. Environmental officials. Lawyers. Witnesses. Cordelia Ashworth arrived late, stepping out of her white BMW like a woman attending a coronation instead of her own trial. Perfect hair. Perfect posture. Absolute denial. She believed, somehow, that authority alone could still bend reality back into place. She took the microphone first. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice confident, rehearsed, hollow. "Tonight we put an end to months of harassment and legal predation against our peaceful community." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Protected wetlands," Kowalski continued. "These are not technical violations. These are criminal referrals." She displayed photographs. Timelines. GPS data. Fines now exceeding $200,000. Federal involvement. Army Corps referrals. Faces drained of color. Homeowners realized, many for the first time, that ignorance did not protect them from consequences. Then Griffin Mulhouse stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "For 37 years, he said, this HOA collected lake access fees for property it never owned and had no legal authority to sell." The projector lit up with financial records. Year after year. Payment after payment. Numbers climbing until the room collectively held its breath. "Approximately $75 million, Griffin said. "Collected fraudulently." That's when Cordelia snapped. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed, lunging for the microphone. "You're all working together to destroy this community." Sheriff's deputies stepped forward. Cordelia tried to pull away. She failed. Deputy Martinez said evenly, "You are under arrest for disturbing the peace." The sound of handcuffs closing echoed louder than any applause. Cordelia was led out screaming about betrayal and property values, cameras capturing every second as her authority collapsed into spectacle. The room sat in stunned silence. Then I stood. "My name is Ezra Callahan," I said. "And I own the water rights to Lake Serenity." I placed my great-grandfather's 1923 deed on the screen. Federal seal. Absolute clarity. I could shut this lake down tomorrow. I could demand restitution. I could pursue criminal charges. And I would be within my rights. The silence became unbearable. But I won't. I laid out my proposal, a 99-year lease to the community for $1 a year. Full lake access restored. Mandatory environmental restoration. Public recreation days. Transparency protections. A way forward. The vote was unanimous. 347-0. 6 months later, Lake Serenity looked reborn. Wetlands restored. Water clear enough to see granite 30 feet below the surface. Native vegetation returned. Diesel fumes replaced by pine and clean air. 127 volunteers showed up for the first cleanup day. People who once feared me now brought coffee and cookies. Cordelia pleaded guilty. Paid fines. Sold her home. Disappeared quietly. Former board members settled civil claims. Insurance companies walked away. Lawyers got rich. But no families lost their homes. The HOA was rebuilt. Term limits, transparency, accountability. Jake, the former security guard, Received the first environmental science scholarship funded by recovered fraud money. Children now fish from a public pier built where illegal construction once scarred the shore. Property values didn't fall. They rose. I built a small cabin overlooking the lake. Every morning I drink coffee watching mist rise off water my great-grandfather claimed a century ago, not for power, but for preservation. The loons still call at dawn. The land still tells the truth. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't crushing your enemy. It's proving that justice, when wielded with restraint, can heal what greed tried to destroy. Because real ownership isn't about control, it's about stewardship, legacy, and knowing when to choose resolution over ruin.